Bright Duty. Every student matters.
Security Council, why reforms change in world politics. Soviet Union was collapsed and emergence of US as a superpower and relation of cooperation between US and Russia and emergence of China and India as a great economic powers, growth at unprecedented rate and new challenges were like genocide, civil war, ethnic conflicts, terrorism, nuclear proliferation, climate change, environmental degradation, and epidemics. Now, the Security Council. Security Council is often described as enforcement or executive wing of the United Nations. The Council consists of 15 members, 5 being permanent members, representing the big five: China, France, Russia, Britain, and United States of America. The 10 non-permanent members are elected by General Assembly by a two-third majority for a two-year term. And the powers and functions of the Security Council, let's see that also. And India has also tried a lot to get Security Council permanent membership, but with the problem of disputes among the neighboring countries, we are not being given this chance to be permanent members. Otherwise, we fulfill all the conditions of United Nations Security Council. It has basic responsibility for the maintenance of peace and security and the Security Council, because India wants this permanent membership because India is densely populated state and it needs the requirement of, like, it has the requirement of security at national and international level. The Security Council will ask the parties to dispute to seek a solution by negotiation, mediation, arbitration, or other peaceful means, such as a judicial settlement. And when none of the peaceful means succeeds, the Council may even resort to military action, and Security Council's decisions are binding on all United Nations members. There is a veto power also. Like, the decisions on procedural matters are made by affirmative vote of 9 members only. And these members, they decide on all the matters, and it shall be made an affirmative vote of 9 members. That means they all should be positive on that point, including the concurring votes of the permanent members and a negative vote by a permanent member. That means if all agree and one of the members is not agreed, that means it is veto. This means the council is powerless to act the face of a veto by any of the permanent members. In case one is not okay with that, so that decision would not be taken. And the others also have to act on the same thing. At that time, the whole council is powerless. Only this veto power will work, and the permanent members have this veto power. Economic and Social Council. The Economic and Social Council, like ECOS, is the principal organ to coordinate economic, social, and related matters of the United Nations. And above all, Trusteeship Council also, which was created to supervise the administration of 11 trust territories which were not fully self-governing, and all these territories have become independent or joined independent countries. And this council was suspended in the year 1994. This date is important and this might come in your MCQs, so please consider this. The Secretary General is the highest functionary of the Chief Administrative Officer of the United Nations. Antonio Guterres is ninth Secretary General of the United Nations. He assumed office on 1st January 2017, and he is required to submit an annual report to the General Assembly on the work of the United Nations. He may bring to the attention of the Security Council any matter which may threaten the maintenance of peace and security. There are some other specialized agencies as well. The United Nations is engaged in work that touches every aspect of people's life. There are many specialized agencies, programs, and funds devoted achieving economic, social, and cultural and scientific progress of all UN members. And the International Labour Organization, like ILO, and agricultural organization promotes, ILO promotes social security of workers in industry, commerce and agriculture, food and agriculture organization, and FAO sponsors the World Food Program and strives to increase agricultural output. WHO helps fight disease everywhere in the world. Fighting diseases fostering development, health promotion, and health education. And these have been the objectives of every WHO program. Let me talk about ILO. The International Labour Organization was founded in 1919. And the Treaty of Versailles as an autonomous uh, part of the League of Nations, and it functioned all through the wars and warriors, and in 1946 became the first specialized agency of the United Nations. And its objectives are to promote social security and of workers and industries, and it gives an incentive to workers, both men and women. So ILO is basically for workers security, and it talks about the to lay down the standards for enacting rules and aims to improve working conditions of the standard of living of the workers. And ILO agreements and rule relates to working hours, wages, holidays, payments of overtime of the people. And World Health Organization is a specialized agency which was established on 7th of April 1948, and this day is observed annually as World Health Day. And the World Health Organization consists of like it consists of World Health Assembly and the Executive Board and the Secretariat. And the basic performance, or we could say the function of WHO, is like it helps fight disease everywhere in the world, and smallpox was eradicated from the world through a global campaign coordinated by WHO. Another WHO campaign aimed at eradicated polio globally by 2005. And then UNICEF is also one of the international children's emergency fund, and its objective activities are aimed at improving the quality of life of children and women in developing countries. The Secretariat headquarters, New York, function. The Secretariat carries out the substantive and the administrative work of the United Nations as directed by the General Assembly and the Security Council and the other organs. At its head is the Secretary General, who provides overall administrative guidance. The Economic and the Social Council. The Economic and Social Council is at the heart of the United Nations system to advance the three dimensions of sustainable development: economic, social, and environmental, and the central platform for fostering debate and innovative thinking, for giving consensus on ways forwarded and coordinating effort to achieve internationally agreed goals. And it is also responsible to the follow up to the major United Nations conferences and summits. And voting in the council is by simple majority. Each member has one vote, and the council is made up of 54 members. And the International Court of Justice, and this branch is of United Nations. This is the primary judicial branch, and it's seated in the Peace Palace in the Hague, Netherlands. And court settles legal disputes submitted by two states and provides advisory opinion on legal questions submitted to it by duly authorized international branches and agencies and the United Nations General Assembly. It was established in the year 1945. The United Nations Charter, the International Court of Justice, is composed of 15 judges, and in for the term of 9 years. And United Nations General Assembly and the UN Security Council form a list of people nominated by the national groups in the Permanent Court of Arbitration. These are the key agencies of the United Nations organizations, like United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And this is UNESCO's mission is to contribute to the building of peace and eradication of poverty, sustainable development, and intercultural dialogues, and through education, the science, culture, communication, and information. The organization focuses in particularly on two global priorities: Africa and general equality. Let's revise once again. How many judges are there in the International Court of Justice? There are 15 judges in International Court of Justice. They are elected for 9 years. And how many permanent members and how many non-permanent members does the United Nations Security Council have? It has 5 permanent members and 10 non-permanent members. And objectives of United Nations to prevent international conflict, to facilitate cooperation among states, to stop conflicts or war between states, to bring countries together to improve the prospects of social and economic development all over the world. Which members of UN Security Council have veto power? The 5 permanent members of UN Security Council have the veto power. The 5 permanent members are the US, Russia, United Kingdom, France, and China. Critically evaluate the difficulties involved in implementing the suggested reforms to reconstruct the United Nations. Candidates may keep in mind the reform as suggested by the General Assembly resolution. However, these reforms could not be implemented because of the various difficulties, which are as regards veto power of permanent members, the Security Council no longer represents contemporary political realities, dispute regarding representation on the basis of terms and economic development, and permanent members are unlikely to agree to any reform which reduces their clout of power or interest in the world body. It lacks equitable representation also. Reforms jurisdiction of United Nations, like creation of peace building commission, achieve of millennium development goals, condemnation of terrorism, acceptance of responsibilities of international community in case of failures, and to protect their own citizens from atrocities, establishment of a human rights council, and condemnation of terrorism. Now, India and the United Nations reforms, like Indian arguments are greater representation, greater support from international community, have more members from the developing countries, and India's candidature is second most populous country, world's largest democracy, participated in all initiative of the UN and economic emergence, regular financial contributor, but hurdles for membership is like troubled relations with Pakistan, nuclear weapons are the to be accommodated, Brazil, Germany, Japan, and South. Now, the relevant effective, what does the United Nations do that is positive? Thus, making the organization relevant and effective. It maintains peace, avoids war, ensure that people don't suffer from hunger and homelessness, helps children protect human rights. And the relevance of the United Nations is like United Nations weaknesses are many. The war in Iraq without any authorization by the United Nations sparked off a heated debate about the relevance and future of the United Nations. But despite these shortcomings, the United Nations has never been more relevant than it is today. And the United Nations serves as a regular forum where world leaders exchange ideas and discuss especially important issues. They can air their grievances against US policies and acts, and it is US interest also not to ignore the wishes of world community. And the United Nations stood up for the human rights everywhere. From time to time, and United Nations made several declarations to enforce civil, political, and economic rights. And the United Convention provides punishment for the crime of apartheid, that is racial discrimination. This you might have done in your class 8. The racial means the color differences, the differences between the blacks and the whites. And South Africa was one of the victim countries of apartheid system. And the United Nations peacekeeping forces have been active in many theaters of conflict, such as Angola, Kuwait, Somalia, Bosnia, and Croatia. The United Nations activities devoted to economic and social advancement, like providing food, shelter, medical aid, and education, are really worthy of praise. And the challenges of globalization made international organizations such as the United Nations absolutely necessary for each other's benefit. Should the United Nations be reformed? Are there any changes required here? Let's see what. The problem of United Nations reforms appears to be confined in two topics. Reform of structures, which mean making Security Council more representative. Second is the reform of processes, that is to say the functioning of the Security Council and the question of the veto power. Let us examine both the things in detail. The reform of the structures, the size and composition of the Security Council reflect the political realities of 1945, and today's Security Council does not reflect the changes which the world witnessed. And during the last about 75 years, therefore, the United Nations system needs two types of structural changes. The very first was there is a need in expansion of Security Council. Many new countries have joined the United Nations and have collapsed the Soviet Union. And secondly, the council needs to be made more representative. The permanent members do not represent the majority of world's population, and Europe is overrepresented because three countries from Europe, Britain, France, and Russia, have permanent seats in the Security Council. And on the other hand, such vast continents as Latin, South America, and Africa do not have single permanent seat in the Council. And China is the only Asian country among the permanent members. How can the world's largest democracy, India, be excluded from a permanent seat in the Security Council? As it is a big question. As just before I discuss the candidature of India also, like India fulfills all its conditions. But just because it has a little tension with Pakistan, so it has been avoided from the permanent membership of the China. But India has a strong candidature for that also. It is important for us to note that membership of Security Council was raised from 11 to 15 in 1965, but the number of permanent members remained unchanged. And reform of process, question of veto power. The world body needs to be made more democratic. Each of the five permanent members, USA, Britain, France, Russia, and China, has veto power. That ensures that domination over decision-making processes, it is undemocratic. And the Security Council's decisions indicate the interest and concerns of only a few powers. See, in case somebody is using its veto power, any of the countries, so that means that decision has no supremacy. So that will not be taken. So that means one country can question those who have veto power, that may interrupt the decision making. And it might be possible that other four countries are taking the strong decision, and just because of the one person, it couldn't be. Open-ended working group on aging. This is a recommendation of working group and the high-level panel. The United Nations General Assembly had convened an open-ended working group on the question of democratic representation and an increase in the membership of the Security Council. It submitted its proposals in 1997. When Kofi Annan was the United Nations Secretary General, some of the proposals were as follows. A new permanent member should be a major economic and military power, and it should be large enough in terms of its population, and it should make substantial contribution to United Nations funds also, and should respect democracy and human rights. And in 2004, a high-level panel submitted two alternative models of expanding the United Nations Security Council. According to model, the number of permanent members should be raised from 5 to 11. And of the 6 additional members, 2 would be from Africa and 2 from Asia, Europe and Latin America would have 1 each. And thus South Africa and Egypt from Africa, India, and Japan from Asia, Germany from Europe, and Brazil from Latin America could be made new permanent members. But new members would not wield veto power. So according to Model B, the total strength of Security Council would raise from 15 to 24. And the additional members would have 4-year renewable terms. So there will be no additional veto wielding power in the Security Council. In other words, none of the models did give veto power to the new permanent members. It remains with all those 5 members, those who were the permanent one. So the newcomers who are coming to join this council, they are not getting that privilege which has already been provided to those 5 countries. Jurisdiction of United States. The United States convened a Millennium Summit in 2000, and the Millennium Declaration adopted at close of summit reflected consensus on 2 objectives: peace and development. So in 2005, United Nations completes 60 years of its existence, and the head of the state or government plus representatives of many countries met to celebrate the occasion. At the Millennium Summit, the Diamond Jubilee meeting in 2005, the world leaders were agreed on the following points, like establishment of a Human Rights Council, and this council has been working since June 2006. Creation of Democracy Fund, to promote democracy around the world, and the United Nations Democracy Fund was launched in March 2006. To shut down the Trusteeship Council, creation of a peace building commission, achieving the Millennium Development Goals MTG adopted at the Millennium Summit. These goals are eradicating extreme poverty and hunger, promoting gender equality, reducing child mortality, and promoting sustainable development. Now, suppression of terrorists against heads of the states and innocent civilians. International community should take coercive action in case of the inability of some states to protect their citizens from atrocities. World Trade Organization, and it was established in the year 1995, and it was a successor of GATT, that is General Agreement of Tariffs and Trades. It made as early 1947, and at present this organization has about 160 members, and the essential functions are making rules for international trade, implementing the multilateral trade agreements. The critic point out that the working process is not transparent, so it controls all over all these things, making the new laws for the international trade, and all the countries and all the member countries have to follow this also. The big powers force country to take decisions without sufficient negotiation. Small nations see the organization as a threat to their national sovereignty. Plus, World Trade Organization helps to follow the rules and regulations for the global level trading, and we could say that this multinational company trend is being launched by World Trade Organization only, and they helped all these companies to work at a global level and to maintain a good standard of living of the people as well. Now let's have the revision. Highlight the role played by India in the United Nations. India has a member of the United Nations from its day of foundation, 24th October 1945, and it has shown deep respect towards the principles mentioned in the United Nations role. So, considering the United Nations Universal, India wants that all countries of the world became a part of UN, and India played a major role in making Bangladesh, Ireland, Hungary, Sri Lanka, and a member of the United Nations. China and Pakistan always opposed India, but India still favored them. Disarmament, all the countries have been demanding the disarmament after the Second World War, and India is one of them, and India has been constantly supporting eliminating the uses of nuclear weapons. And the Limited Test Ban Treaty (LTBT) signed by US, UK, and USSR was welcomed by India, and Foreign Minister of India was chosen as representative in United Nations Disarmament Summit. And support the revolt against colonialism and apartheid. India has always revolted against colonialism and apartheid and racism. It is due to the reason that in the year 1961, it all happened, and India presented itself. Now there is a picture like based question. What does this cartoon represent? It represents a humanitarian crisis in Darul Sudan. And what type of crisis does the cartoon show? Starvation, genocide, horror, etc. And what is message is given? A big helping of words only, because during these crises the international organizations perform debates, speeches, but these no actual or no support was reached to the people. NGOs, international NGO, non-governmental organizations are voluntary organizations or associations formed by individuals to perform a variety of functions. The funds of the NGOs come either from donors or from the government. Examples of few main organizations operating at the international level and are Red Cross, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch. And Human Rights Watch was founded in 1978, and it brings to our attention and human rights abuses in the world. And its initial emphasis was on political and civil rights. Later, it expanded. It began issuing reports on ethnic violence and use of child soldiers and racism and dangers of placing landmines, which exploded when persons or vehicles touched them. Let's revise with the HOTS. These are high order thinking skills. In which matter do international organizations help to establish better living conditions in various countries? And what is the threat from global warming? It may cause sea level to rise, and the cities at the bank of seas will be submerged. And important to stop increasing temperature globally, so that the major industrial powers to cooperate and right to changes that could be seen in the world politics after 1991. The Soviet Union has collapsed, and US is the strongest power and the only power. Then suggest ways to make United Nations contemporary in changing environment, and creation of a peace building commission, establishment of human rights council, and India's participation and appropriate as a permanent union member, United Nations member, and India is the world's largest democracy. India has participated in virtually all the initiatives of the United Nations. And what is the need of international organization like United Nations? International organization like United Nations are very important. They help in the matters of war and peace. They also help countries cooperate to make better living conditions. An international organization provide a platform to resolve and discuss contentious issues and find peaceful solutions. Why was United Nation established after First World War? 1914 to 18 League of Nations established in the year 1920, and the objective was to resolve the international conflict and differences without going to war. But it could not succeed in its objective, and the Second World War began on 1st September 1939, and many more people died and were wounded in this war than ever before. So the immediate need for more powerful organization was felt. And where is the permanent headquarters of the International Court of Justice located? The headquarter of International Court of Justice is located at The Hague in Netherlands. And UNICEF raised funds for selling greeting cards and through various fundraising campaigns. And it is a negative vote and reference to any matter. No matter can be referred or passed if any member uses the veto power. And on 24th October 1945, the United Nations formally came into existence, and the General Assembly elects the judges of the International Court of Justice along with the Security Council, and highlights four factors that justify India's claim to be a permanent seat in United Nations Security Council. India is the world's largest democracy. India is the second most populous country in the world, comprising almost one-fifth of the world's population, and regular financial contribution of India to the UN and has never flattered on its payments. And India's economic emergence on world stage, and India has participated in virtually all initiatives of UN and its role in the UN peacekeeping efforts. And the four steps suggested by the member states of the United Nations in 2005 in order to make it more relevant. To commemorate the 60 years of the existence of the United Nations, the heads of all member states met in September 2005 to celebrate the anniversary and review the situation. The leaders in the meeting decided that the following steps should be taken care: creation of peace building commission, acceptance of responsibility of the international community in case of failures of national government to protect their own citizens from atrocities, establishment of a human rights council, and agreements to achieve the millennium development goals. And what does India support? Increase in number of permanent members or increase in number of permanent members? India supports increase in number of both permanent members and as well as non-permanent. And why do some countries question the issue of India's inclusion as a permanent member of United Nations Security Council? Strained relations with Pakistan. Some countries are concerned about India's nuclear capabilities, and China is also not in favor of India because of the strategic reasons. And if India is accommodated, other developing countries will also ask for permanent membership, and some other feels that Africa and South America must be represented.